Hi, Patrick Phillip here at Effective Martial Arts HQ. In this lesson, understanding grappling through the application of the 5 basic principles of fighting. Alright, so this is a theory that I've spent a lot of time developing. I made a video on this previously and how the whole theory explains itself not only for hand-to-hand combat, not only for grappling, but also for striking, wrestling, and to a certain extent all other forms of fighting as well, including warfare. Now in this video, we're really going to expand more on how these 5 basic principles apply to the grappling situation of hand-to-hand combat. So quick overview first, the 5 basic principles are the principle of control, which is in many ways the ultimate goal of fighting, and this manifests in the grappling range mostly through grips, positional control, as well as strikes to a certain extent. Then there's the principle of access, which manifests mostly through angle and distance. Then there's the principle of stability, and the manifestations of that are mostly through the concept of posture, structure, and base on the ground. Then there's the principle of efficiency, which states, in other words, that it's always important to conserve energy, so stay relaxed, breathe, and accomplish your objectives while using the minimal amount of energy. I'm going to expand on this later. And the last important concept is the principle of tactics, or in other words, knowing when to appropriately use offense and defense. Now, the advantage of the grappling range to help us understand these principles is that in general, grappling goes on a little bit slower than the other ranges of hand-to-hand combat. Striking usually is very quick, wrestling is very dynamic as well. In the grappling range, we usually have time in certain cases to slow down the action and really understand what's going on. So this is a unique opportunity to help us understand those basic principles, which also apply in all other ranges as well, but can really be illustrated to greater effect in the grappling range. So without further ado, let's get into each one of those concepts in more detail and with examples and illustrations for each. First off, the principle of control. Now this, again, in many ways is the ultimate goal of fighting. We want to exercise control on an opponent, our training partner, or whatever the situation may be. Now, in many ways, for control, the first prerequisite is to be able to control ourselves. So control our body, control our emotions, control our movements on the ground, having appropriate fitness as well. So we all covered that in the white belt curriculum on our channel. So check out those playlists for the white belt basics in striking, wrestling, and grappling. But essentially, how it manifests with a partner is that control will be exerted either through grips and positional control or through strikes, because we do want to consider strikes on the ground as well. So from the guard situation, the person on top can obviously strike. From the bottom, we can also strike using kicks, and that's going to exercise some level of control. The person is going to be forced to respond to those strikes, and that's going to affect their base, it's going to affect different aspects of their movements, and ultimately their consciousness if the strike is significant enough. Now, the other tangible way to exercise control on an opponent is through grips. So we definitely want to be able to have a grip first. It always starts with grips when we are fighting, especially in the grappling range. Grips will lead to positional attacks, and grips will lead to submission attacks as well. Defensively, we also want to negate our opponent's attempts at gripping us and then get a positive gripping strategy of our own. So there's a whole science to grip fighting. We will expand on this in future videos, but essentially just know at first that when you are grappling, you want to get your own grips and you want to prevent your opponent or training partners from getting grips on you. And from there, we'll expand on different types of grips that are possible. Next way to exercise control on the ground is through the positional attacks. So in the guard situation, the advantage usually goes to the person on top, especially when strikes are involved, but the person on bottom can still exercise a lot of attacks and do some devastating moves from the bottom position. But when the person on top starts passing the guard and starts pinning the bottom position person, then they're increasing their level of control. So when they get around the legs and they pin the body to the ground and the back is flat on the ground, this is a great way to exercise control on an opponent on the ground. So side control, full mount, eventually getting all the way behind the person with back control is another way to increase our amount of control on an opponent or training partner. The next basic aspect or basic principle is the principle of access. In many ways, access will be the prerequisite to control. So we want to increase our access while diminishing the opponent's or training partner's access to us. This will be manifest mostly through distance and angle. So when we are, for instance, in the guard situation, the top person or the top grappler will try to get an angle on the person and move to the side in order to get an angle of entry. What happens when the person on top starts getting to the side is that the person that's on the bottom and no longer facing their attacker now has less access to them. So our hands are in front of us, we can manipulate the objects that are in front of us. Objects that are on the side are a little bit further out of reach. So we need to reset that angle in order to reset our access and be now on a more equal playing field. So the lesson from this is that when you are on top or bottom position, in any situation in grappling and other ranges as well, you never want to tolerate your opponent getting an angle on you, because then you start losing. So you want to address that right away, reset your angle, and then you can be more on the offense or you can defend more effectively as well. At the same time, this is closely related to distance. So when the person starts getting an angle, most likely, if they're too far away, it doesn't even matter, but most likely they're going to be getting close to you as they get an angle, and you want to definitely then reset the distance. So knowing when to disengage, create a distance, and then that'll allow you to reset your angle. The other more extreme example of the concept of access is when the person gets all the way behind you. So if they are all the way behind you and you're in your back, then your offensive opportunities are very limited and you need to do everything you can to reset your access and start facing them again. So that's the concept of access. The third basic principle is the principle of stability. And this manifests mostly through posture, structure, and base. So the concept of base is probably the easiest to understand, and this is when the person that's standing will use their feet for stability. That's going to be their base. So your base is essentially your points of contact with the ground. Now for the person on the bottom, ironically, it's a very good position to be in stability-wise, because you have a large surface of contact with the ground and you are very stable in that position. The disadvantage is if you had less mobility, so less opportunities to create angles and increase your control on the opponent, although it is possible if you know how to maneuver your body in that situation. When you're on top, the person can be attacking your base. So that's going to be positional attacks, mostly attempting sweeps. So you want to be ready to reset your base and manipulate your center of mass and your points of contact with the ground so that you do not get fallen down all the way and go down to your hip and eventually to your back, and you ideally maintain the top position. That's going to be a general strategy in grappling. Positionally, you generally want to be on top. So that's the concept of base. The concept of structure is illustrated mostly with the integrity of your elements that are supporting you, either supporting yourself on the ground or the structure that is keeping the opponent away. So you can have from the bottom position your feet in between you and the other person, and that could be your structure. You can have your arms as well that are a structure that's maintaining your opponent at a distance, and you want that structure to have good integrity. Next is the concept of posture, and that's also going to be included in the concept of stability, that you in general want to always maintain good posture. You can bend forward a bit, you can arch a bit, but in general you never want to allow your head to be turned side to side or turning like so. Offensively, if you can manipulate your opponent's posture and make him look away, you can definitely increase now your opportunities to attack. You diminish their access, you diminish their strength in many ways, and you can then attack more convincingly. This is also very clearly illustrated in the bottom side control and bottom full mount situations. If you can apply what we call a crossface, you will weaken your opponent or training partner tremendously, and that is in general always a good idea. You can also do that from the back control situation, applying a crossface in order to go to an armbar. So there's a lot of situations where you can bend the opponent's neck, and that's in your best interest. So defensively, obviously you don't want to let that happen if the person starts getting control of your head. The fourth principle is the principle of efficiency. So in other words, this just says that you want to use the least amount of energy possible to execute your attacks and your defensive maneuvers in all situations. Obviously, that's not just true for grappling, but it's specifically easy to illustrate in grappling. And in order to be able to do so, it's important to be able to do what we call flow rolling. So kind of moving through the positions with intentionally decreasing the amount of strength we're going to use. Now, obviously, in a real situation, there's a certain amount of muscular contraction that you must use in order to make your moves work. But the more skilled you are in terms of techniques, the less strength you will need in order to execute those techniques. Because the goal is never to go against directly facing the opponent's strength, but rather find ways to go around it. And when you flow roll, that forces you, because you're not using the strength element, it forces you now to rely more on techniques. So obviously you need to acquire those techniques, you need to acquire that knowledge through study time, so by watching videos like you're doing right now, but also observing fights, sparring, breakdowns, rolls, grappling matches, so you can see what's going on and know what to do in each one of those situations. As you increase your knowledge and you find more intelligent ways to maneuver your body around your opponent, you will be able to use less of your physical resources in order to get to your goals. And that will be in your best interest, because if you are less tired than your opponent, and conversely, if you can make your opponent more tired, they will be less efficient. Eventually, they will have less energy left, and then you can get to your decisive winning position a lot easier. The other concept that's closely tied to this is, in order to be able to help you develop the skills that you need in each one of those positions, it's important to use the concept that we call progressive resistance. So especially if you're just starting out, you don't want to go full speed or full strength when you're developing your techniques. That being said, you don't want to just let your partner do the techniques that they want to do either. The optimal way to practice is to apply a little bit of resistance, as much resistance as your partner is able to handle, or ask your partner to apply as much resistance as you're able to handle with intelligent reactions, and that will force you now to use your techniques at the speed at which you are able to apply your techniques, and then develop the skills that you need in order to be successful in each one of those situations and in each one of the techniques that you want to master. The last basic principle of fighting, specifically applied to grappling, is the principle of tactics. So put simply, it's knowing when it's appropriate to attack or go on the offensive, and when it's appropriate to defend or go on the defensive. And for a beginning grappler or developing martial artist, it can be kind of hard to know when you're in danger and when you're starting to get attacked, and when you are in a position where you could attack. And that especially is a little bit harder to see, especially in the guard situation, where both top and bottom person can attack or defend. So a good drill for you would be to specifically isolate your defense. So you say you can be in bottom guard and only defend, for instance, the guard passes or the strikes. So you would move your body, try to prevent the guard strike, but not get any offensive movements of your own going. Conversely, you can also be still in the bottom guard position, but now specifically practice your offense. So getting your grips, getting your strikes going, and now the person on top will explicitly only be defending from the top position, not attempt any attacks such as strikes or guard passes. This is a good way to kind of dissociate each and understand which is which. From there on, it's important to distinguish when you are in an actual live sparring situation, when you are winning, so you start getting an angle on a person, you start getting close to a guard pass, for instance, and when you are defending, so when the person gets an angle on you, you want to reset that, or when you are winning from the bottom, you get a grip that can lead to a submission, you definitely want to pursue that. So more on this later, but essentially as a beginner, you should be very comfortable switching from offense to defense and knowing when you're in danger and when you have an attack going, but then your opponent or training partner gets something on you, gets a grip or gets an angle. You want to be able to address that right away, either by fighting that grip, resetting that angle, so you get your defense going in order to get back on the offensive after. So more on this later. This is a quick overview of the 5 basic principles of fighting applied to grappling. Quick recap. The first principle is the principle of control, which in many ways is the ultimate objective of fighting. We can exercise control through grips, through positional attacks, as well as through strikes for top or bottom position. There's the principle of access, meaning we generally want our opponent or training partner right in front of us, and conversely, we want to get an advantageous angle on them, and that's true from bottom or top position. There's the principle of stability, which states that we want to be conscious of our base on the ground and our structural elements of our body, either supporting our body on the ground or keeping our opponent away. And we always want to be mindful of our posture as well. So keeping our spine in good alignment. So we don't want our hips facing away or our head being bent in any way. And as an offensive grappler, we want to manipulate that on our opponent and strive to bend their head and turn their hips away in order to execute our attacks. The fourth element or fourth principle is the principle of efficiency. And that quite simply says that you just want to be as relaxed as possible. Remember to breathe and use the least amount of energy in order to execute your techniques. So when you're starting out, you should purposefully slow yourself down in order to develop the techniques and get time to think about what you're doing rather than going full out and drilling bad habits. So try to stay relaxed at all times. And the last principle is the principle of tactics, which in other words means knowing when it's appropriate to attack and when it's appropriate to defend. So being able to play offense and defense appropriately depending on the situation. And that's about it, guys. If you've enjoyed this video, click the like button right now. If you have appreciated any particular part of this video, if this information was new to you, let us know in the comments. If you think this doesn't make any sense, let us know in the comments as well. If you have any questions, ask away and we'll be happy to help. And stay tuned. We have a lot of more quality content coming your way. We will be expanding on these principles in the future for different situations in the grappling range and also applying these concepts to the wrestling as well as striking range. So this is what we do here at Effective Martial Arts at our school and on this channel. We teach one curriculum for striking, wrestling, and grappling. So we basically created one curriculum, a belt system for MMA. So if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel right now. We're still just getting started. We've got lots of awesome content coming your way. And if you are a returning subscriber, thank you very much for staying tuned and good job for doing your study time because this is really a great tool to help you improve faster. Now, once again, it was a real pleasure making this video for you. Already looking forward to the next ones. So signing off, Patrick Phillip here at Effective Martial Arts HQ in Pointe Claire, West Island of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Thank you very much for watching. Practice well.